Take a look at the banknote which appears on the screen. Do you notice anything strange about it? This is a $100 trillion bill. Supposedly, whoever has $100 trillion is the richest person in the world. However, these are Zimbabwean dollars, which during the hyperinflation of 2008 lost all value. Today, this banknote trades on eBay for a few US dollars, but only because it has a collectible value and people buy it as a curiosity. So how does a country reach such an absurd situation in which its currency loses all value? What happens to the people living in that country? In order to answer these questions, we must first understand how governments finance themselves. Before the appearance of the first coins, a ruler had only one source of income, which was taxes. He would use his military force in order to collect a certain percentage of the produce from the peasants who lived within his domain. The tax was collected in the form of agricultural goods such as wheat, barley, farm animals, and so on. A merciful king would take a reasonable share and allow his subjects to prosper. A cruel king would take most of the produce for himself and leave the peasants with barely enough food to survive. But whether the tax was reasonable or not, collecting it was always difficult. In order to collect the tax, it was necessary to appoint a whole array of clerks, who were often corrupt and used to keep a considerable share for themselves. There was also a risk that the peasants would rebel against a tax which was too heavy, and the king would lose his throne. When coins were first introduced, a new source of income has emerged. The rulers quickly realized that the right to mint coins gave them an enormous power. Suppose that a standard coin initially contained 10 grams of pure gold, and that 1,000 new coins were minted each year from the gold that was mined throughout the kingdom. And suppose that the ruler wanted to go to war, and that in order to equip his soldiers and pay their salaries, he needed 100 gold coins. Instead of raising the annual tax, he can reduce the amount of gold in each coin, so that it only contains 9 grams of gold and 1 gram of cheap copper. This way, instead of the usual 1,000, he can mint 1,111 coins from the same amount of gold. The new coins will look very similar to the old ones, and the peasants won't suspect a thing. The king could go to war without it costing him a penny. Naturally, the horses, the carriages, the swords, and the shields that the king buys with these new coins were not created out of thin air. The craftsmen from whom he bought the equipment put real work into their creation. It seems that they are the ones who lost their money. However, this is not necessarily the case. As long as the public is unaware of the fraud and treats the new coins the same as the old ones, it's possible to exchange them at face value. The cheap coins can circulate for months until someone with a sharp eye notices that they contain less gold than usual and are therefore worth less. The scam is always revealed in the end, but by then the new coins have already switched hands many times, and there is no way to go back and demand compensation from the king. Therefore, the ones who ultimately bear the cost of the war are the people, who unknowingly pay the hidden tax called inflation. Pleased with the trick that went so well in the previous year, our king decides to debase the coins even further. If last time he put 9 grams of gold in each coin, this time he'll put only 8. Instead of the usual 1,000 coins, this time he will have 1,250. Once again, the coins begin to circulate, and at first people don't notice the difference. But this time the merchants are more experienced. They are not willing to accept payment in the new coins, but only in the old coins, which are known to contain 10 grams of pure gold. If they are forced to accept the new coins, they demand a higher price as compensation for their lower value. As a result, prices of goods in the kingdom are rising, and the cost of living is climbing. Some of the people blame the merchants and denounce them as greedy capitalists. But it does no good, and they have no choice but to watch their purchasing power diminish. The principle behind inflation is very simple. Assuming that the economy is closed, the amount of money in circulation at any given point represents all the available goods and services. If the supply of goods increases while the money supply remains the same, prices are expected to fall. This is what we call deflation. If the supply of goods and the supply of money increase at the same rate, then prices will remain the same. This is what we call price stability. But if the money supply grows faster than the supply of goods, then prices are expected to rise, and we will experience inflation. Contrary to what we've been told, inflation is no accident. It is mainly the fault of our governments, who abuse the right to create new money. Most economists nowadays deny this fact. They claim that under the current monetary system, the government doesn't have the authority to print new money at all, and that this power has been given to the central bank. Moreover, they say, most of the money in the economy is not created by the central bank, but by the commercial banks as they issue new loans. There is truth to these claims. During the 20th century, the authority to create new money was indeed taken away from the governments and transferred to the banking system in order to deal with the government's tendency to print too much money and generate inflation. But in the past decade, central banks have betrayed their traditional role as gatekeepers and began to finance the government's deficits by printing money out of thin air, in a process known as quantitative easing. In effect, this is equivalent to the printing of money by the government. History shows that the temptation to corrupt the currency is too great for leaders to resist. Time and time again, we've seen how empires rose, prospered, and grew stronger as long as they had sound money. But once the leadership started abusing its right to issue the currency, their power began to dwindle until they collapsed and disappeared completely. The best example of this comes from the Roman Empire, whose currency was called the denarius. During the early stages of the empire, this coin was made of almost pure silver. But during the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, the silver content of the denarius gradually decreased, until it became a bronze coin with nothing but a thin silver coating. Apparently, each of the emperors who debased the denarius had a good reason for doing so. A long series of wars, epidemics, and other disasters forced them to spend more money than they were able to raise in taxes. But the end result was disastrous. The skyrocketing cost of living undermined the citizens' trust in their government and ultimately led to the collapse of the empire. In the modern era, we no longer carry with us gold or silver coins. Instead, we conduct our trade using paper notes or their digital representation, which is stored on the bank's servers. This makes it much easier for the authorities to generate inflation. Instead of diluting the precious metal content of the coins, they can simply increase the money supply digitally. This way, trillions of dollars can be created at the click of a button. From the point of view of the citizens, this is a destructive process. Those who save discover that the value of their savings steadily declines. Shopkeepers are repeatedly raising the price of their products. trying to deal with the constant erosion of the currency. Workers whose salaries are losing purchasing power demand higher wages, which leads to a further increase in the price of the products that they produce, and so on and so forth. This is a vicious cycle, which if allowed to continue, may get out of hand. At the peak of the process, the value of the currency may collapse within a short period of time. A classic example of this is the case of the Weimar Republic in Germany after World War I. In order to pay the reparations imposed on it by the Allied powers, Germany began to print huge amounts of money. As a result, the value of the German mark collapsed. The price of a loaf of bread, which was 1 mark in 1919, reached 100 billion marks in 1923. Absurd scenes were seen in the streets, such as people carrying wheelbarrows full of banknotes in order to purchase basic goods, or children playing with piles of worthless money. People started fueling their stoves with paper notes because they were cheaper than firewood. There's no doubt that inflation leads to economic destruction. But even worse than that, it leads to social destruction. People who live in an inflationary environment learn that saving is not worthwhile because the value of their savings is constantly eroded. They get used to spending their money as quickly as possible before prices rise again. This way, inflation produces generations of people who only live in the moment and don't care about the future. The lack of savings makes the population financially vulnerable. Any personal crisis, such as an illness or a job loss, can devastate families and leave them destitute. The public loses faith in the currency, in the government, and finally in humanity itself. In order to forget their trouble, they drown themselves in a mixture of alcohol, sex, and cheap entertainment until their moral compass disappears completely. This is the toxic environment that gave rise to the most evil regime in human history, the Nazi movement. Unfortunately, we as individuals have no ability to stop the inflation, even when we recognize it ahead of time. We can participate in the political game and try to influence the policy of the government or the central bank. But this is usually in vain. Our leaders tend to prefer quick solutions over dealing with the structural problems of the economy. Every time a crisis breaks out, they print money and bail out the markets at the expense of the long-term stability of the currency. All we can do is protect ourselves and our families from the consequences. Historically, precious metals are the only asset that maintained its value during times of high inflation. Holding physical gold and silver is, in my view, the best way to deal with it. Hello, my name is Oren Elbaz, and I am the Silver Hermit. Since 2013, I've been publishing articles about the state of the global economy in simple and straightforward language that everyone can understand. For years, I've been arguing that central bank policy of low interest rates and QE is irresponsible and dangerous. Time and time again, I've warned that it will lead to inflation. Now, this warning has turned into reality. We're suffering from a continuing economic crisis and from painful inflation. But despite a difficult situation, we must not sink into despair. I believe there are ways to deal with this crisis and perhaps even benefit from it. The best thing we can do is to invest in our financial education. The saying knowledge is power is especially true in this day and age. So please subscribe to this channel and share it with your friends and family. Hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I release a new video. Remember, these are dangerous times, but together we will reach a safe harbor. Before we say goodbye, a few words of warning. I am not a licensed financial advisor. This video is intended for general informational purposes only and should not be regarded as investment advice. Before taking any investment decision, please consult with a professional financial advisor who may assess your personal investment objectives and needs.